In this lesson, we're going to learn the process of importing static mesh assets. Alright, so whenever working in Unreal Engine, we've talked about working with BSP geometry, and we've called them brushes. And while we can build a level out of this, we can build a very simple room out of this geometry. It's important to note that building an entire level where a player can traverse through an entire world, brushes are not going to be the best solution, simply because they're so expensive. They have surfaces and a lot of extra information on them, and so what we would do is we would replace what we've blocked out with static meshes because they are so much cheaper. So the static mesh comes from a 3D modeling software like 3ds Max or Maya or Softimage. You would go ahead and build your mesh inside of that program, and then you would export it from there as an FBX and then import that FBX into the engine. So to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like, let's go into 3ds Max. Now you could use any 3D software program that you like, and you can see here that I have a couple of different assets here. I've got a wall for our windows, and then I've actually got two different windows here. I've got a bottom and a top window, so they're going to be layered on top of one another. And then I also have like this electrical outlet with these electrical pipes that go along with it. And these are built in such a way that you can actually bring them in and snap them together inside of the engine. You want to be able to build assets that are reusable. So building an entire room inside of 3ds Max is one way of creating a level. However, it's not very customizable, and whenever we're working with games, we want to be able to take assets and reuse them as many times as possible, and that's called a modular workflow. Okay. Now you'll also see that I have this large area, and this is going to represent our floor and our ceiling. The walls we'll have right inside of Unreal already. Okay, so let's go ahead and take this this wall here, and you'll notice that I've given it a name called SM. That's for static mesh, underscore whatever the object is. In this case, it is a wall, and then underscore any details about that. So it's a little more descriptive as to what kind of wall it is. Now, the naming convention is totally dependent on you and what's going to be best for your workflow. So let's take this object, and we need to make sure that our object is positioned properly and also its pivot point is positioned properly. So as of right now, if we go ahead and grab the Move tool, okay, and we select our object, you'll see that it is at 0, 0, and 0, and that's based on the pivot point position of the object. So if I go ahead and just isolate that just to look at it on its own, you can see that the pivot point is right on the grid, okay, in the center of the mesh at the bottom. And you could put the pivot point anywhere that you want. Okay, so like in 3ds Max, I could go ahead and affect the pivot point. I can move it and put it like at one of the corners or something like that. In this case, I'm going to leave it right at the center, okay, of that. Let's go ahead and turn that off. Now, with this set, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and make sure that the object is at 0, 0, 0. That's really, really important because whenever it's brought into the engine, the pivot point that is created whenever it's brought into the engine is based on where it was positioned in 3D space from the FBX. Okay, so let's go ahead and take this. Let's go to File, and then we're going to Export Selected, and then we'll put this in a certain file. So this is going to be in your Meshes folder, and as you can see here, I've already imported all of those pieces there, at least the wall and the windows in this case. And you can see here that this is a double window.fbx, so I've given it the exact same name. So once we export that out as an FBX, we can go ahead and bring that inside of Unreal. So the way that we do that is we go to our content browser. And in the content browser, you'll want to put these into a folder that makes the most sense for you. In this case, all of these folders that I have are the starter files, and I don't want to overwrite those, and I don't want to mix the new files that I've already created. And so what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder inside of my game folder. So make sure you have that selected, and then you're going to click on New, and then New Folder. You'll see that that comes up, and we can give it a name. In this case, we're going to go ahead and call that, let's call this DT underscore meshes. Okay, actually let's do DT underscore architecture, just to kind of stick with what we have already. So there we go. Now under that, we have our folder. We'll select that folder, and then we're going to go to import, and then we'll find the folder that we want to import to. So in this case, it's going to be under Introduction, Unreal Engine 4, Reference Files, Meshes, and then we're going to go to the Static Mesh Wall double window. Okay, so let's open that, and it's going to bring up our FBX import options. Now here at the top, you'll want to select what kind of object this is. So it's going to be a static mesh, a skeletal mesh, or an animation. A skeletal mesh is a 3D mesh that has bones in it, and so this would be something like a character. Okay. Now there are other types of assets, not just characters, that are skeletal meshes, but this is the most common. Now we also have animation, and you'll be bringing in animation files as FBX files as well. But we won't be talking about that in this course because it's outside of the scope of that. So let's go ahead and go to Static Mesh. We don't have any LODs for this because we're going to be staying in this single room, so we don't have to worry about level of detail based on the camera position. We're going to go ahead and calculate our normals because I didn't create any normals in that specifically, and combine meshes. So on an object you may have multiple meshes. You'll want to combine those into a single one. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now we also have some advanced options here. You can import your mesh LODs if you have those applied, any vertex colors. You can go through a little bit of cleanup with removing some degenerates, but all of this is looking pretty good. You can also import your materials and textures in normal maps if you already have those applied in 3D, and usually that is the case, but I didn't want to overload you with that information. So let's go ahead and just hit import, and you'll see that that comes in, and if you double click on that, you can see that right inside of your static mesh editor. Okay, so inside of the static mesh viewport, you can hold down the left mouse button. That will allow you to move around just like you would in the viewport in the level editor itself. So there is our static mesh. We can take a look at its wireframe. We could also take a look at its UVs, and we could also take a look at its UVs based on the channels that we've created. Okay, and there we go. Now if you hover over the item, you can get a little bit of information about it. So you can see how many triangles and vertices it has, how many UV channels, and then also how many materials can be applied to this. So in this case, I've created 4 materials for this object because there are going to be several different materials that go onto it. And so applying that is going to be very helpful. Alright, now you'll notice this little star next to that, and that means that this is an unsaved file in our project. So to save that, we'll simply right click anywhere. I usually save it on the game, and then I'll just go down to save. Okay, so it goes through that. If we go to DT architecture, you'll see that that little star has disappeared. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and import the rest of those files just to kind of speed up the process, and then we'll bring those in. We'll start to situate our static meshes and build up that version of our level, and we'll get started with that next.